On a warm summer night in Indianapolis, a life was stolen in front of a family home. 16-year-old Korey Dajuan Carter never made it inside that evening. He was found slumped in his car, bleeding from a gunshot wound that struck his main artery. A boy with dreams, with school just starting, gone in seconds. Was it a cruel accident, or was he mistaken for someone else? 25 years later, the question still lingers, haunting those who loved him. It was August of 1998 on the northeast side of Indianapolis when everything changed for the Carter family. That night, outside his mother's home on Schick Drive, 16-year-old Korey Dajuan Carter was shot and killed. The summer was ending. School had just started back, and Korey was only a sophomore at Broad Ripple High School. He was young, full of life, with his whole future ahead of him. But in one sudden moment, his story ended, leaving only pain and questions. At the center of this story is Korey's family. His mother, Korey Carter, remembers every detail of that night. She was at home when she heard the sound of a gunshot outside. At first, she didn't think much of it. Then two of Korey's friends ran in and told her the unthinkable. Her son had been shot. Carol rushed out and found him slumped in the car. Beside her stands his older sister, Keyiona, who has carried the weight of that loss for 25 years. Korey was only 16, a sophomore at Broad Ripple High School. The school year had just begun, only a few days in, and he was settling into his classes. He wasn't the type to get into trouble. Friends described him as easygoing, someone who liked being around people and had a bright future ahead of him. At that age, life was supposed to be about basketball games, hanging out and making plans for the future. But for Korey, those plans ended far too soon. The northeast side of Indianapolis looked like any other neighborhood that night. Families were home, the streets were calm, and nothing seemed unusual on Schick Drive. It was the kind of place where people felt safe stepping outside or sitting on the porch during a summer evening. The air was still, the sky dark, and life felt ordinary. But in an instant, that quiet street became the scene of a tragedy that would never be forgotten by the Carter family. Carol was inside the house when she heard the sound of a gunshot outside. It was quick, sharp, but at first it didn't scare her. Gunfire wasn't something she expected on her street, and she didn't imagine it had anything to do with her family. For a brief moment, she stayed calm, not realizing that the noise marked the end of her son's life. That small detail, her lack of fear at first, would later haunt her as the night unfolded.
A few moments after the shot, two of Korey's friends came rushing into the house. They were panicked, their words stumbling out as they tried to explain what had just happened. They told Carol that Korey had been shot. At first, she struggled to process what they were saying. It didn't make sense. Her son had only been outside moments earlier, but the fear in their voices and the urgency on their faces told her this was real. Something terrible had happened. Carol ran outside, her heart racing, and found her son in the front seat of his car. Korey was slumped over, blood pouring from a wound that had struck his main artery. The sight was more than any mother should ever face. Neighbors began to gather, some in shock, others frozen in silence. The night, once calm, was now filled with panic and disbelief. The gunshot had lasted only a second, but its echo left the street heavy with grief. Police arrived quickly after the shooting, but there was little for them to work with. The street was dark, the gunman was gone, and no clear witnesses could point to who fired the shot. Officers searched the area, spoke with neighbors, and tried to piece together what had happened, but answers were hard to find. For Carol and her family, the questions started right away. Who would want to harm Korey, and why here at his own home on this night? As police searched for answers, Korey's friends spoke up. They told Carol and investigators the same thing. Korey wasn't in trouble with anyone. He wasn't the kind of boy to make enemies. They spent time with him almost every day, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No fights, no grudges, no threats. To them, the idea that someone had targeted Korey didn't make sense. He was just a teenager enjoying summer, caught in something far bigger than he ever knew. News of Korey's death spread quickly through the neighborhood. People were shocked that a boy with no record, no ties to crime, could be killed so suddenly. Parents worried about their own children, wondering if anyone was truly safe anymore. Neighbors who once felt comfortable outside now carried fear with them. The killing raised bigger questions about violence in Indianapolis at the time. How could something like this happen here? And how could a young life be taken so easily? Not long after the shooting, whispers began to spread through the community. People said the bullet was never meant for Korey at all. Instead, the real target may have been another boy in the neighborhood, someone who also went by the name Dajuan. The idea was chilling. Could a simple mix-up of names have cost Korey his life? His family held on to that theory because nothing else made sense. A boy with no enemies was killed by mistake. The talk of another Dajuan gave the case a strange twist. This boy, living in the same neighborhood, suddenly became the focus of attention. Some believed he was the one the shooter had been after all along. But little was known about him, and his name only added confusion to the tragedy. To Korey's family, it felt unfair and unreal. Their son had nothing to do with whatever trouble existed, yet he was the one who paid the price.
Korey's friends, who had been with him that night, quickly spoke up. They wanted to make it clear they had nothing to do with the shooting. They explained where they weren't, at the basketball game, at certain hangouts, places people might have assumed they were. Their words were simple but firm. They were with Korey, not causing trouble, not looking for a fight. For Carol, their loyalty mattered. These boys stood by her son, even in the middle of tragedy. But these were still kids, barely old enough to handle what had just happened. They were shaken, confused, and struggling to put the night into words. Trauma has a way of breaking memories into pieces, and what they shared came out in fragments. They knew Korey, they were with him, but beyond that, everything felt blurry. Their fear and grief made it hard to speak clearly. In many ways, they were victims too, caught in a nightmare they couldn't explain. Police tried to follow the whispers about mistaken identity. They looked into the other Dajuan, hoping it might explain why Korey was killed. But nothing concrete appeared. There were no clear threats, no solid ties linking the boy to the crime. Witnesses stayed quiet or had little to offer. Each lead felt like smoke, visible for a moment, then gone. For Carol, it was painful to watch. The idea that her son had been taken by accident lingered, yet proof remained out of reach. The case stood on shaky ground, with answers slipping further away. Weeks turned into months, and still there were no arrests. The case seemed to stall, each day pushing the truth further away. Detectives came and went, but no breakthrough ever arrived. The street where Korey died grew quiet again, yet the silence carried weight. For his family, the waiting was unbearable. Each knock at the door, each phone call carried a flicker of hope that faded just as quickly. The trail had gone cold, and with it, the promise of justice seemed to fade into the distance. In time, the other Dajuan quietly left the neighborhood. No one knew exactly why, but people noticed his absence. For some, it only deepened suspicion. If he wasn't involved, why leave? For others, his departure felt like the last thread slipping away. Without him around, the theory of mistaken identity had little to stand on. The community lost its only lead, and with it, much of its hope. For Carol and her family, it was another blow. Answers seemed further than ever, and Korey's story remained trapped in silence.
Carol and her daughter, Keyiona, were left with little more than rumors. Whispers came and went, each one carrying a hint of truth, but never the full picture. Some said Korey was mistaken for someone else. Others claimed the shooter had vanished far from Indianapolis. None of it brought comfort. Nights were hardest, when silence filled the house and questions circled without end. They wanted answers, even the smallest piece of clarity, but none ever came. Instead, they lived with fragments, broken stories that never added up, and the loss that never healed. For Keyiona, the loss of her brother was more than she could put into words. She was still young, trying to understand how life could change so suddenly. The house felt empty without Korey's laughter, without his presence nearby. She often spoke about how unfair it felt, how she missed the small things, like him teasing her or sharing secrets only siblings know. The silence left behind was heavy, a constant reminder of what was taken. For a girl her age, growing up without her brother meant carrying an emptiness that time alone could never fill. Today, Korey would be 41 years old. He might have a family of his own, maybe teenage children filling the house with the same energy he once carried. But those years were stolen before they began. For Carol and Keyiona, the grief isn't only about the boy they lost in 1994. It's about the man he never became. Birthdays pass, milestones arrive, and they imagine who he might have been. Each thought is bittersweet, a reminder that his story ended too soon. The pain stretches beyond the past, reaching into a future that will never exist. Every year, the Carter family comes together to honor Korey. They share memories, light candles, and speak his name so it is never forgotten. Sometimes it's quiet, just family gathered in reflection. Other times friends join in, remembering the boy who once filled their days with laughter. For Carol, it is both painful and healing. Each remembrance keeps Korey's spirit alive, even as the years move on. They refuse to let his story fade into silence. In their hearts and in their words, Korey remains present, loved, missed, and carried forward through every passing year. Recently, Keyiona found a new way to celebrate her brother's life. She organized a sneaker ball in his memory, a night filled with music, dancing, and bright colors. People came dressed in their best outfits, paired with sneakers, a playful touch that felt true to Korey's spirit. The event was joyful, yet every smile carried a trace of sadness. It was a reminder of what had been lost, but also of the love that still surrounded him. For Keyiona, the sneaker ball was more than a party. It was proof that her brother's name would never be forgotten.
Even as the family finds ways to honor Korey, the questions remain. Did police truly follow every lead, or were paths left unexplored? Was there someone in the community who knew more than they ever admitted? These doubts linger like shadows that never leave. Carol and Keyiona have carried them for decades, wondering if the truth was closer than it seemed. The silence around the case feels heavy, almost intentional. With no arrests, no answers, and no justice, the mystery endures. Each question circles back to the same ache. Why Korey? And why has no one spoken? The hardest question of all has never been answered. Why? If Korey was killed by mistake, how could such a senseless error happen? How could a simple name lead to a boy losing his life? Carol has turned it over in her mind for years, searching for reason in something that has none. Keyiona too wonders if her brother's death was nothing more than a cruel accident. The thought is unbearable. To lose Korey because of someone else's mistake feels beyond tragic. It feels impossible. Yet for the Carter family, it is the only explanation that remains. Another heavy weight on the case is the silence that followed. Were there people who saw something but chose not to come forward? Was fear of retaliation stronger than the pull of justice? In neighborhoods touched by violence, silence can spread quickly. It protects some, but it punishes others, families like the Carters, left without answers. Carol has often wondered if someone nearby knew the truth but stayed quiet to survive. That thought lingers like an open wound. If voices had spoken back then, maybe the story would be different. Instead, silence became another wall around Korey's case. Back in 1998, the neighborhood on Keyiona felt shaken, but still close. People whispered about the shooting, some too afraid to say much, but nearly everyone remembered Korey. Over time, though, things changed. Families moved away, new ones moved in, and the memory of that night began to fade.
The violence that once shocked the community became less surprising as the years passed. For those who lived it, the pain stayed sharp. But for many others, Korey's story slipped into the past, a tragedy remembered only by the few who still carry his name in their hearts. For Keyiona, the years have carried a quiet kind of loneliness. She often admits she envies those who still have their brothers and sisters by their side. Watching friends grow up with siblings, sharing milestones and memories, reminds her of what she lost. Korey should have been there for birthdays, graduations, even simple family dinners. Instead, his absence has marked every moment. She carries love for him still, but it is love without the chance to share life together. That emptiness, she says, never truly goes away. It sits beside her, a constant reminder of what was stolen.
Decades have passed, yet Korey's case remains officially unsolved. No arrests were ever made. No one held accountable for the life that was stolen. For Dajuan and Keyiona, every year without answers adds weight to the grief. They replay the events in their minds, wondering if justice was ever truly possible. The police files gather dust, leads have long gone cold, and the neighborhood moves on. But the family cannot. Korey's absence is felt every day, and the lack of closure turns each memory into a mix of love, loss, and frustration that never fades. Korey's death did not happen in isolation. In the late 1990s, Indianapolis struggled with youth violence, and the city saw too many young lives cut short. Streets that seemed safe were sometimes the opposite, and families often lived with quiet fear. Korey was one of many teens lost during that era, but his story stands out because of the mystery surrounding it. No enemies, no reason, and still taken in a single instant. Reflecting on those years, it's clear the city carried a heavy burden, and the Carters were left to face a grief that was all too common, yet uniquely devastating. One of the most haunting parts of Korey's story is the name Dajuan. In that neighborhood, another boy went by the same name, and some believe he was the real target. A simple mix-up, a name, a face in the wrong place may have led to a life being stolen. The idea is almost impossible to grasp. How could a mistake like that happen, and how could it end so tragically? For Carol and Keyiona, the thought that Korey was killed simply for being the wrong Dajuan is both infuriating and heartbreaking, a cruel twist of fate that forever marks his story. The idea that Korey died for something he had nothing to do with is almost unbearable. He wasn't involved in trouble, he had no enemies, yet his life ended violently. Mistaken identity turned a normal summer night into a nightmare for his family. It wasn't just a loss, it was an injustice, a life erased for no reason at all. Carol and Keyiona carry that weight every day. The unfairness of it lingers, a reminder that sometimes the world can be cruel in ways that make no sense, taking someone innocent and leaving questions that may never be answered. For Carol, the pain of that night never fades. She remembers every detail, the sound of the gunshot, the panic in her son's friends' voices, and the sight of Korey slumped in the car. Those memories replay in her mind, uninvited and relentless. Losing a child is a wound that never heals, and for her, it is sharpened by the senselessness of it all. Each anniversary, each quiet moment brings the same ache. She carries Korey's absence everywhere, a mother's grief that is constant, heavy, and impossible to put into words. Decades have passed, but the questions remain. Korey's family still hopes someone out there holds the key to the truth. Maybe a neighbor saw something. Maybe a friend knows more than they ever admitted. Carol and Keyiona want answers, closure, and justice for a life taken too soon. If you are watching this, if you remember that night or know something, even a small detail, your voice could change everything. Korey's story deserves to be heard, and the family deserves the truth. Speak up so his memory is honored and justice can finally begin. Even after 25 years, the Carter family holds on to hope. They know time has passed, but they also know memories can last a lifetime. Someone, maybe a neighbor, maybe a friend of a friend, might remember a detail, a face, or a word that could finally bring clarity. Carol and Keyiona believe it's not too late. They refuse to let Korey's death fade into silence. Each day without answers is hard, but hope keeps them moving. They believed that one voice, finally spoken, could change everything and bring justice at last. Korey's story raises a question bigger than one family's loss. How many other lives have ended under the shadow of mistaken identity? How many families live with grief, unsure if their loved one was targeted or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Across cities and decades, these cases often fade into cold files and quiet streets. Korey's death reminds us that injustice can be random, cruel, and unresolved. It is a haunting thought that for every case like his, answers may never come, and lives remain forever changed. In the end, Korey's story comes back to one haunting truth. A single shot, fired into summer night, changed everything. One mistake, one cruel twist of fate, and a family's life was forever altered. Carol and Keyiona live with the absence every day, carrying memories, questions, and a grief that never fades. The street on Schick Drive is quiet again, but the echoes of that night remain. A promising boy, a future stolen, and a family left with nothing but the weight of what could have been.